and welcome to episode 34 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. First off, I wanted to say thanks to everyone who endured through, diligence, my last podcast, my bonus episode, when I was having a bit of an emotional breakdown. Many people will ask, why did I publish such a silly rant in the first place? Well, the reason is simple. I wanted to show that it's not all just peaches and cream in what I'm dealing with. There are weak points, and there are strong points. There are ups, and there are downs, as one can only expect when you're dealing with slow, enduring heart failure. And so I was having, obviously, a significant weak point, and felt it incumbent upon me to actually share that with my listeners, to show how hard it actually can be at times when you're struggling with this disease emotionally, not just physically. So I want to thank everyone who listened to my whining and I hope that your judgment was kind enough to tolerate that and see it for what it was, and that I merely wanted to express and share with you all the difficulties I have in fighting this disease and trying to keep my head above water. And there are many times when it's a significant struggle. That's all there is to it. So, with that being said, I wanted to continue on to part 2 of my history of my career, as I had originally promised. I'm a person of many things. One of them I've sworn not to be as a liar, and I did promise to continue that in episode 1 of that, and so I'll continue it here in case there are those that are interested, since so many had originally asked. So in the first episode, as a quick recap, I really went over a pretty illustrious career, in my view, and that is only my view. I got a lot of thanks for what I did, of course, and a lot of praise, but I was quite happy with the services I provided, and I know deep in my heart of hearts that I did help millions of people in protecting their personal information and doing my job well enough to secure people's livelihoods and their well-being. Let's also note that non-public information could be used for the more extreme. It could be used to murder someone. Such things happen to actresses like Rebecca Schaeffer, where her driver's license information was sold to a stalker who eventually murdered her as she came outside her house, derived from DMV records. This is before such records were made far more difficult to attain, thankfully. And we did have driver's records, but we obviously only provided it to those who could demonstrate a need for such records and could be appropriately credentialed by our compliance group, which I was in charge of. And no murders happened on my watch. And so, with that said, moving on, the reason I wanted to split into part 2 is I wanted to do a recap of my time after, I think, the zenith of my career, and also my life. At the time, I was personally excelling very well, socially active. I played hard and I worked hard, and I think it was one of the best times of my life around that time period. And then life changed a little bit before it truly worsened. And that's going to be the purpose of this episode, to describe that and describe how I came to pass to the position where I'm at now, where I have such mental breakdowns and sad moments as I did in the last podcast. So hopefully you stay with me through this, and there will be more to come. First off, after I left the large company where I was working at originally, basically in charge of the compliance group, I came across a new opportunity that was one of those situations where I frankly couldn't refuse, simply because of the monies offered. The significant increase in my salary was enough to make me jump ship from where I was at and where I'd served so diligently for so many years to a new business that, as it was pitched to me and described to me, and as far as I saw in my own research, desperately needed an improved compliance program. And so that's what I did. I resigned from my position and moved to another higher position. Again, though, a very similar role in which I was in charge of the compliance group at a company, but it's a more local company, higher position, but smaller company, so smaller pond, so to speak. And I worked pretty diligently, through my time there, and tried the best I could to turn around some of the culture and some of the behavior that this company was conducting. But at the end of the day, I hit a brick wall, and I describe it as such. If you come to me and you say, my plan is to rob a bank, I want you to mitigate my risk when I rob the bank. I can do many things. I can develop an alibi. I can get you the getaway vehicle. I could provide disguises. I could provide the weapons. I could do many things to mitigate the risk. But when there's a fundamental problem with your business plan of robbing a bank, there's nothing more I can do about that. And that is sort of the problem I encountered. Obviously, we weren't robbing banks. That's just a parable. But the business plan and the culture was so ingrained that there was little more I could do to mitigate the risk, and I came across a real moral dilemma in continuing my work in that environment and supporting who I saw were people engaged in nefarious activity. Now, as I'd mentioned before, I would frequently go, every year, to the International Hackers Convention, DEF CON, in Las Vegas. I'd attend every year. And I still continued my attendance while working at this other company. Well, it so happened at one such attendance, I was offered a job by a friend of mine who was actually the founder of the first company I had worked at in compliance. And he was essentially just running a basic consumer reporting agency, which you don't know in layman's terms, it's just a background screening company for tenants. And so I would come on board in the smaller company, again, in charge of their compliance program. Well, I thought about it long and hard. The salary was much less, but the moral dilemma would go away. And that being said, I sided with the moral high ground, and I said yes to the position. A few days passed when I was at the office at my current job, where I'd returned to the office, and I was stewing with how I was going to tell my employer that I had to resign. when suddenly my boss at the time called me into his office for a quote, catch up. We all know what that means. It's regarding something you can't put in a subject line in an Outlook request. So I attended the meeting, and he told me that I had to lay off 2 of my employees. I knew in my head that my salary was equal to 2 of my employees, so I quickly turned around and diligently selected myself and said, there's your 2 employees. I lay off myself. He was shocked, needless to say, but after some discussion, I talked him into it. And lo and behold, I successfully laid myself off from my position at the company to go work at my friend's background screening company. It was quite sweet for some time because part of the layoff I had a nice severance, and so for a while I was collecting 2 paychecks and essentially was duly employed for several months. And that was a pretty sweet deal, and it worked out quite serendipitously and very well for me. So I worked there for some time, but then I kind of maxed out what I could do for a small company. There's only so much, and it could probably be handled best from, a smaller external consultancy position than a full-time department. When lo and behold, the old company, the original company I worked at for so many years, came to me and asked me to come back to them. And so I jumped on that and went back to the old company and left my friend's company under good terms. Just saying, listen, I've done everything. You're in a good spot. This is probably better handled from an outside consultant. You don't need a full-time person to do this. So I'm saving you money, and I'm going to go back to the original company. And that's how it worked out. And so I went back to the original place, and for some time, several years I want to say, I spent more time there and diligently did my original job of checking to make sure customers were who they said they were, making sure they were fully credentialed, making sure they had a right to know the sensitive information we were selling, and, of course, chasing down the back door of the hackers that are constantly attacking a company such as that. When lo and behold, I came across another job opportunity. And this would come to be, unfortunately, my last job in my career. Keep in mind, I'm spanning decades here in this story because I have over 20-some years of experience at this point. So, these job hops are not happening week to week. They're happening years to years. So, I just want to add that background. Anyway, I had a new opportunity that intrigued me to work at another company, a major credit bureau, and I saw that as a good continuation of my career. Decided to leave once more the original company I'd worked for so long and went to work there. But little did I know that was going to be the final step in my long, illustrious career. And so, enter I into the last position of my career, several years ago now, at this point, and began my position there in the law department, which is where their compliance group was located, and focused on again, credit reporting agency or background screening company compliance. Slightly different animal than my years of experience where I first worked, but still had to deal with regulatory compliance, which means legal requirements, best practices, company policies, and, well, many state and local laws and the hodgepodge of rules that regulated how we provided such sensitive information. And I started kind of with a clean slate. There was no full-time compliance person handling the division to which I was assigned. So I did what I do best, which is build a department from the ground up and do it under the direction from my superiors out of state to conform to the broader company-wide policies and structure, and worked very diligently and hard to minimize existing problems, mitigate risks, and to demonstrably brought the company within a significant reign of improvement, I would say, with its compliance program with respect to this particular division in which I was in charge of. We also had an internal audit group at this company, and just through the audit itself, you could demonstrate the issues that they would discover declined dramatically from audit to audit under my tenure. So I could see and demonstrate that my efforts in my position was resulting in true improvements within the company and true risk mitigation from year over year, under which I was quite pleased, and I believe so too was my internal customers, the folks that I worked for, to make sure they were compliant and maintaining the business as best as they should. And so in my mind, it was just a continuation of my career in a good sense. Years came and went. I had many reviews. I think they were every 6 months. And each one was very positive, excellent, if not better. And I was quite happy in my role. I also supported the compliance group on the litigation side, where I would fly around the country and represent the company in small claims court. Because a lot of people would sue the company, and we actually took the time to fight back, and I was one of the suckers who was chosen to fly out to defend the company in these lawsuits. Probably at least half the time, the plaintiff would not even show up. But whenever they did, I won the case. So with all my representation in court, I came away with a 100% record of wins for the company. Again, 100%. We won. So, even in my assistance to other departments within the law department was excellent, for lack of a more eloquent word. And then that all changed. I had reported to several managers at headquarters, company headquarters. But then suddenly I reported to a new manager in a totally different state, who worked very closely with the head of the business division, and well, actually multiple divisions, I should say, including which was the one I supported. And this new boss, she worked very closely with this other individual who was in charge of the business side of things for multiple verticals. And he was a notorious, cruel, baby-faced, temper tantrum wielding, red in the face kind of individual who I would never work for if you paid me $1 million. Thankfully, though, I didn't work for him. But essentially, because my new boss was right next to him in this new out-of-state location, it's almost as if I came to work for him indirectly with my new boss in the new location. And as soon as she came to manage me, let me remind you, I just switched managers. My role changed not one bit. She decided that despite all my excellent reviews prior, and me following the direction and the philosophy of my superiors from headquarters to the T, she decided that I had to go from the get-go. For some reason, I put a sour taste in her mouth. She even disclosed to a fellow colleague, "I can't get that guy," with respect to me. And she was a gossiper. At this time, too, I was dealing with frequent illnesses because of my worsening health condition. Just an unfortunate fact. And she openly complained about that to my colleagues. Very unscrupulous, in my book. She then proceeded to create a very hostile work environment, I'm sure, in concert with the same individual of whom I referred to earlier, who I think was the background influencer in her management style. So, my next review was negative. The first negative review in my entire life. Literally, the first negative review in my entire life, when my behavior had not changed one iota, except for increased absences because of illness, and that I cannot control. She also took me away from trainings that I organized. She was even openly argumentative with me in meetings in front of others and colleagues. She even hired my replacement before I was terminated. It was supposed to be someone to support me, quote unquote, but I saw through it immediately. I knew upon hire that she was trying to hire my replacement and get them trained up to speed before I was dismissed. So from the very get-go with this new manager, she was very vindictive, very rude, very crass, and her and I, needless to say, did not see eye to eye on how to run a compliance group, despite the fact that I've demonstrably mitigated the risks and problems within the vertical of which I was responsible. It was quite shocking and disenchanting. Time went on, and unfortunately, I did have a heart condition that put me in the hospital for some time. I, in doing so, used up my FMLA, or the Family Medical Leave Act, for those of you that don't know, that permits a person to take leave for family or their own medical issues and can be returned to the same or similar position without threat of being terminated. But it only lasts for so long, and I had exhausted it at this time in the hospital. And so, in my mind, that was moot. I had exhausted it, but I was returning to work and I could reaccumulate it as time went on. But lo and behold, when I was out of the hospital, I got sick. I got very sick. Turns out I came down with sepsis, which has a survivability rate of only 50%. I had a 104 fever. I was delirious. My parents were called into my bedside, unbeknownst to me. One time I woke up in a delirium, and I noticed my mom was standing there holding my hand. I just went, "Oh, hi, Mom." Not putting two and two together, that's not a good sign that your parents are called to your bedside. But this all occurred, of course, when my FMLA had already expired. But for God's sake, it was sepsis. I wasn't worried of any career problem because I came down with sepsis, which I caught in the hospital in my prior visit. So I left the hospital, I was discharged, and I was told I have no position to return to and was forced on disability. Because as soon as my disability ran out, I'd lose my position. So, prematurely, even though my health was worsening, I was forced on short-term, then long-term disability because my superior had eliminated my position. True as I expected, giving it to the new hire she had hired to replace me. And so, that ended that hostile work environment right there and then. Or so I thought. 2 years later, after being on long-term disability, the company full-on terminated me, losing all my medical benefits. Reason why? Because they just have a policy of terminating people who have been on disability for 2 years. No other reason was given. And at that point, I had to switch health insurance and do everything on my own. And that was basically the end and the final nail into my long career, in which I worked so hard and saved so many people's well-being, where I had achieved multiple professional certifications that required continuing education credits, and to attain were not unlike passing the bar. All of that in a fell sweep from this vindictive harpy who just didn't, quote unquote, get me, and didn't like the fact that I was battling medical issues while still trying the best I could to maintain my career for as far as I could go. And that was how it unfortunately came to an end. So, with that was the fall of the empire. That was the end of my career. It was very sudden, considering it was built up so diligently and with hard work and success for over 20 odd years before it ended in just a matter of pretty much a few days. It saddens me, and I am still bitter about it, to be blunt and honest, because I feel like I could have worked a little bit longer before I was truly forced on disability because of my health. Instead, I was prematurely on disability, which I don't need. Frankly, I want to avoid disability as much as humanly possible. But lo and behold, circumstances would just have it otherwise. Now, to this day, I'm still proud of my career, what I did. I know I did good work. I know I took care of a lot of risk. I know that I actually helped many people and saved the personal information on millions of people. Those are some very enormous accomplishments, and I still wear them with a badge of honor. The fact that it came crashing to an end merely because my new superior didn't get me is sad. But it is what it is. And I think that could be a warning to anyone in their career and in their job. No matter how good you are at what you do, no matter how proud you may be, no matter how much good work you have done, things can come to a crashing end very quickly if just one person makes it so. It takes just one person, maybe two, to end all of it. And that's terrifying. There is no such thing as job security. You hear that a lot in news stories these days. And unfortunately, I came to find out through real experience that that is very, very true. And so now I sit on disability, but now there's no chance of me working. I pass out routinely. I couldn't possibly work. I'm on 18 liters of oxygen. I can't even leave the apartment. My physical condition worsens with each passing month. So, that's all long gone. That's a huge loss. I loved working. I loved being productive. I loved contributing to something. Not to mention the social reward of being in an office environment. But alas, it is what it is. And there's nothing I can do about that. Not now. But with that, I'll end this week's podcast. I'm sorry it's a little short, but I just wanted to provide, as promised, a description of where I was in my career prior to being on disability and prior to falling victim to heart failure. Because now that's my whole life, is just the heart failure. And now you know how quickly success and something that you've worked hard at can disappear so quickly. In case you hadn't been aware already. And with that, I will close out this week's podcast and thank you very much for listening. Thank you for tuning in again, despite my whiny last podcast. Once again, I thank you for that and your tolerance. But just know, yeah, it's not all sunshine and positive thinking. I have moments of weakness like any other human. And it can be very difficult to keep my head above water. But with all that said, please follow the podcast. Turn on notifications so you're alerted to future podcasts. And if you truly want to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/mydogwilleatmyface. I'll put a link in the description, of course. And that's it for this week. So, ciao for now.